time. Let's talk royals. Well, last week it was dominated, wasn't it, about Prince Andrew. What did he, didn't he know? Was he going to be? He is going to be leaving his 30-room mansion in Windsor, Royal Lodge. Richard Pratt.
The walls of Royal Lodge have witnessed nearly 2 decades of an extraordinary arrangement. A divorced couple living together, presenting themselves as the epitome of modern friendship and loyalty. But those walls are now closing in on Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. And the carefully constructed narrative of harmony is crumbling under the weight of scandal, public pressure, and what sources describe as mounting personal tension between the former Duke and Duchess of York. Sarah Ferguson, known affectionately as Fergie, has long been Andrew's most steadfast defender. Through accusations, legal battles, and social exile, she remained by his side when others fled. She spoke warmly of their bond in interviews, shared family photographs on social media, and maintained that their relationship transcended traditional definitions. They were, she insisted, proof that divorce didn't have to mean animosity. They were the happiest divorced couple in the world. But happiness, it seems, has its limits. And after years of standing in the shadow of Andrew's controversies, Sarah Ferguson appears to have finally reached her breaking point. According to multiple sources close to the Windsor estate, Fergie is preparing to leave the sprawling Royal Lodge mansion and possibly leave Andrew behind in more ways than one. The royal residence, a 30-room Georgian mansion set among the manicured grounds of Windsor Great Park, has been their shared home since 2004. It's where they raised their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. It's where they entertained guests, celebrated holidays, and maintained the illusion of an unconventional but functional family unit. For Sarah, it represented stability after years of financial struggles and public humiliation following her divorce. For Andrew, it was a symbol of his status within the royal family, a grand estate befitting a son of the Queen. But that symbol is now tainted beyond repair. The pressure to vacate Royal Lodge didn't begin with King Charles. It started under the late Queen Elizabeth, who watched with growing concern as her second son became embroiled in scandal after scandal. The most damaging, of course, was his association with convicted offender Jeffrey Epstein and the subsequent allegations made by Virginia Giuffre, who claimed she was trafficked to Andrew when she was 17 years old. Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing, but the damage to his reputation and to the monarchy itself was catastrophic. In January 2022, the Queen stripped him of his military titles and royal patronages. He could no longer use the style His Royal Highness in any official capacity. He was, for all intents and purposes, banished from public life. Yet he remained at Royal Lodge, shielded from full accountability by the very institution he had embarrassed. The situation became even more complicated when it emerged that Andrew had been paying what's known as a peppercorn rent on the property, essentially a nominal fee that bears no resemblance to the true value of the estate. Despite signing a 75-year lease in 2003 and reportedly spending £7.5 million on renovations, Andrew has contributed virtually nothing to the Crown estate in terms of actual rental payments. For British taxpayers already frustrated by the cost of maintaining the royal family, this revelation was the final straw. King Charles, who inherited both the throne and the Andrew problem upon his mother's death, has made it clear that this arrangement cannot continue. The king is said to be determined to streamline the monarchy, reducing costs and eliminating privileges for non-working royals. Andrew, who has undertaken no official duties since 2019 and has no prospect of returning to public service, is an obvious target for this downsizing. Initially, Andrew resisted. He insisted that his lease was ironclad and that he had every legal right to remain at Royal Lodge for decades to come. He pointed to the millions he had spent renovating the property, arguing that he had more than earned his place there. But behind the scenes, palace officials were preparing for his departure. Meetings were held, legal documents were reviewed, and quiet negotiations began about where Andrew might go next. The obvious solution was Frogmore Cottage, the 5-bedroom property on the Windsor estate that had briefly been home to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle before their departure to California. Smaller and far less grand than Royal Lodge, Frogmore would still allow Andrew to remain on Crown property, close to his family, and within the security bubble of Windsor. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. But then came the complication. Andrew didn't want to move to Frogmore alone. He wanted Sarah to have her own residence as well, specifically Adelaide Cottage, another property on the Windsor estate currently occupied by Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales. According to sources, Andrew has demanded that both he and Sarah be given separate Crown properties, allowing them to live apart while remaining neighbors within the royal enclave. The request has been met with astonishment and anger. Royal commentators have called it audacious, tone-deaf, and utterly unrealistic. Richard Fitzwilliams, a prominent royal expert, didn't mince words when he said, "If they think having 2 homes will solve things, they're still living in a fantasy world." Others have pointed out that Sarah Ferguson, as a private citizen with no official royal role, has no entitlement to a Crown estate property at all. Yet the demand reveals something deeper than simple greed or delusion. It suggests that the living arrangement at Royal Lodge, the one that has been held up for so long as a model of post-divorce friendship, has become untenable. Friends of the couple have hinted at growing friction, with Sarah reportedly exhausted by the relentless scrutiny and ongoing controversies that follow Andrew wherever he goes. The latest scandal only made things worse. Earlier this year, emails surfaced showing Andrew writing to Jeffrey Epstein, just days after the now infamous photograph of the prince with Virginia Giuffre became public. In the correspondence, Andrew reportedly reassured Epstein, telling him, "We're in this together." The revelation was devastating, not only because it demonstrated continued contact with a convicted criminal, but because it showed a shocking lack of judgment and awareness. For Sarah, who had once described Epstein as her supreme friend and had accepted financial help from him in the past, the renewed attention on her own connections to the disgraced financier has been deeply damaging. Several charities that had maintained relationships with her have quietly severed ties. Corporate partnerships have evaporated. The carefully rebuilt public image she had cultivated through weight loss campaigns, children's books, and social media engagement has collapsed almost overnight. A royal insider described the situation as the final humiliation, adding that there was no coming back from this level of disgrace. For a woman who had spent decades trying to rehabilitate her reputation after the toe-sucking scandal of the 1990s and various financial embarrassments, this latest blow may be the one she cannot survive. The atmosphere at Royal Lodge has reportedly become unbearable. One source close to the family described it as tense and joyless, adding that the couple hardly know what they're doing or thinking. Another said that Sarah feels she has lived under Andrew's shadow for far too long and deserves a fresh start, even if that means walking away from the man she has defended so fiercely for so many years. For Andrew, the prospect of living alone at Frogmore Cottage represents a dramatic fall from grace. The man who once strutted through royal events in full military regalia, who jetted around the world as a trade envoy, who basked in the privileges of his birth, will now occupy a modest home with no staff, no status, and no public role. It's a humbling prospect for someone who has spent his entire life surrounded by wealth and deference. But perhaps more significantly, it marks the end of the York family unit as it has been known. Beatrice and Eugenie, who have tried valiantly to maintain their own public profiles while supporting their parents, are said to be struggling with the latest developments. They have their own families now, their own responsibilities, and the constant controversies surrounding their father threaten to overshadow their own accomplishments. The princesses have remained loyal to both parents, but there are limits to what they can defend. Beatrice, who works in business and technology, and Eugenie, who is involved in the art world and charitable causes, both need to protect their own reputations. The taint of scandal can spread quickly, and neither daughter can afford to be seen as complicit in their father's failings or their mother's poor judgment. If Andrew and Sarah do proceed with the move, and sources suggest they are close to making a final decision, the question of what happens to Royal Lodge becomes critical. The Crown Estate could place it on the open market, where it would likely fetch upward of £30 million. Alternatively, it could be renovated for another member of the royal family, possibly Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, who have quietly become two of the most reliable working royals. Either way, the departure of Andrew and Sarah from Royal Lodge would mark the symbolic end of an era. The property has represented their post-divorce arrangement, their daughters' childhoods, and their stubborn refusal to accept their diminished status within the royal family. Leaving it means acknowledging reality, something both have struggled to do for years.
Not on. And all the brothers were, so I took them out of their grave, poor loves, and said, come on.
For Sarah specifically, the move represents both loss and opportunity. Friends say she is ready for independence, tired of the endless cycle of scandal and survival, and eager to establish an identity separate from Andrew's toxic legacy. But others argue that her demands for a crown property are evidence that she still hasn't grasped her true position. As one commentator bluntly stated, "It's not up to the king to house Miss Ferguson. She has no right to a crown estate home." The situation is further complicated by Andrew's recent loss of his remaining titles and honors. Though he remains a prince by birth, a title that cannot be removed without an act of parliament, he has been stripped of his dukedom, his place in the Order of the Garter, and his status as a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. These were not merely ceremonial positions, they represented his place within the royal hierarchy and his connection to centuries of British history. Sarah, meanwhile, no longer uses the title Duchess of York in any official capacity. While she technically retains the right to the style following their divorce, the association has become more liability than asset. She is now, in essence, simply Sarah Ferguson.
Probably had to get on better with the policeman than Prince Andrew, in fact, just to make sure that in the car journey back they said, oh, she's nice.
A private citizen with a famous name and a troubled past. The downgrade in status is painful for both, but particularly for Sarah, who has spent much of her adult life trading on her royal connection. Her books, her media appearances, her business ventures, all were predicated on her identity as a member of the royal family, however tangentially. Without that connection, her marketability diminishes considerably. Yet there are those who believe this forced separation from royal life could ultimately be liberating. Freed from the constraints and expectations of royal protocol, Sarah could potentially rebuild her career and reputation on her own terms. She has demonstrated resilience before, bouncing back from financial ruin and public mockery to create successful ventures and charitable initiatives. Whether she can do so again, particularly at this stage of her life and under such damaging circumstances, remains to be seen. For Andrew, the prospects are bleaker. At 65 years old, with no professional skills, no public role, and a thoroughly destroyed reputation, his future looks increasingly isolated and irrelevant. The man, who once believed himself indispensable to British trade and diplomacy, now faces the possibility of spending his remaining years in a modest cottage, largely forgotten except when scandal resurfaces. The demand for two separate properties suggests that both Andrew and Sarah recognize their living arrangement has run its course. What once seemed like a charming eccentricity, divorced spouses maintaining such a close relationship, now appears as denial and dysfunction. The happiest divorced couple in the world label, which they embraced so enthusiastically, rings hollow in light of recent events. Royal observers have noted that the couple's insistence on maintaining their relationship as it was may have actually prevented both from moving forward with their lives. Sarah never fully established independence from Andrew, always hovering in his orbit, defending his choices, and benefiting from his residual status. Andrew, meanwhile, never had to face the full consequences of his actions, because Sarah was always there to provide emotional support and public solidarity. Now, as they prepare to leave Royal Lodge and potentially live apart for the first time in nearly 2 decades, both are being forced to confront uncomfortable truths. Andrew must face his fall from grace without his most loyal defender by his side. Sarah must decide whether she will continue to tie her fate to his or finally strike out on her own. The king's position is clear. He will not subsidize two separate properties for people who contribute nothing to the monarchy. He will not allow Royal Lodge to remain a symbol of unearned privilege and unaccountability. And he will not let sentiment or family loyalty prevent him from making the difficult decisions necessary to modernize and streamline the institution. For Sarah Ferguson, this moment represents the culmination of years of choices, some admirable, many questionable. She could have distanced herself from Andrew when the Epstein scandal first emerged. She could have built a life independent of royal association. She could have protected her own reputation rather than sacrificing it in defense of someone whose behavior became increasingly indefensible. Instead, she stood by him, insisting on their unique bond and their unconventional arrangement. Now, as the consequences of that loyalty become undeniable, she must decide what comes next. Will she continue to stand by Andrew, accepting the isolation and disgrace that comes with that choice? Or will she finally, after all these years, choose herself? The financial implications of this split cannot be understated. Sarah has weathered multiple financial crises throughout her life, from bankruptcy declarations in the late 1990s to revelations that she owed hundreds of thousands of pounds to various creditors. Her relationship with money has always been complicated, marked by lavish spending habits developed during her years as a royal duchess and an inability to maintain that lifestyle after her divorce. The security of living at Royal Lodge, with minimal expenses and the protection of crown property, has allowed her to rebuild some semblance of financial stability. Without that arrangement, Sarah faces difficult questions about how she will support herself. Her book deals, while occasionally successful, don't generate the kind of income necessary to maintain even a modest independent household in the expensive areas surrounding Windsor. Her endorsement deals have dried up following the latest controversies. Her speaking engagements, once a reliable source of income, have become increasingly scarce as organizations distance themselves from anyone connected to the Epstein scandal. Andrew's financial situation is equally precarious, if not more so. He has no income beyond what the king chooses to provide him through private means. The £3 to £5 million settlement he paid to Virginia Giuffre in 2022 depleted much of his available resources, money that reportedly came partially from the sale of a Swiss chalet and partially from funds provided by the late Queen Elizabeth. He has no career to return to, no pension from royal duties, and no prospect of generating legitimate income given his pariah status.
Peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat.
The irony is not lost on observers that both Andrew and Sarah are demanding separate crown properties when neither can afford to properly maintain a single residence on their own. The sense of entitlement that permeates their demands speaks to a fundamental disconnect from reality, a failure to recognize that their positions within the royal family have fundamentally changed and will never be restored. Historical precedent offers little comfort for the couple. When King Edward VIII abdicated in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson, he and his wife spent the rest of their lives in exile, never fully welcomed back into the royal fold despite years of attempts at reconciliation. While Andrew has not abdicated, he couldn't, as he was never in line to inherit the throne in any realistic sense. His effective banishment from royal life carries similar weight. Once the monarchy decides you are more liability than asset, there is rarely a path back to acceptance. Sarah's relationship with the wider royal family has always been strained. During her marriage to Andrew, she was often viewed as too boisterous, too undignified, too prone to embarrassing gaffes. After the divorce, she was largely frozen out, invited to family gatherings only rarely and always as a courtesy to her daughters rather than in recognition of any standing of her own. Her famous exclusion from Prince William's wedding to Catherine Middleton in 2011 was a clear signal of where she stood in the family hierarchy, which is to say, barely within it at all. The late Queen Elizabeth maintained a cordial but distant relationship with her former daughter-in-law, reportedly appreciating Sarah's dedication to her daughters and her continued friendship with Andrew, but never fully forgiving the embarrassments of the toe-sucking scandal and subsequent financial improprieties. King Charles has never been warm towards Sarah, viewing her as a distraction and a source of controversy that the family could do without. Prince William and Prince Harry, though fond of her as their childhood aunt, have their own priorities and cannot afford to be seen defending someone so thoroughly compromised by scandal. This isolation within the family structure makes Sarah's current position even more precarious. She has no powerful allies within the institution to advocate on her behalf. She has burned through whatever goodwill remained.
We keep up a firm pace because there's so much to do, there are so many opportunities.
Through her continued association with Andrew and her refusal to distance herself from the Epstein connections. Even her daughters, devoted though they are, can only do so much to shield her from consequences. The question of where Sarah will actually go if she leaves Royal Lodge remains unanswered. She has maintained a modest apartment in London in the past, but whether she still has access to that property or could afford to live there full-time is unclear. Some have speculated that she might retreat to a property abroad, perhaps in Switzerland or France, where she could live more quietly away from the intense scrutiny of the British press. Others suggest she might move closer to one of her daughters, becoming more involved in their lives and the lives of her grandchildren as a way of finding purpose and stability. But all of these options require resources that Sarah may not have. They also require a willingness to accept a dramatically reduced standard of living, something she has historically struggled with. The woman who once traveled by private jet and wore designer gowns to royal events may find it difficult to adjust to the reality of flying commercial and shopping at high street stores. For both Andrew and Sarah, the move from Royal Lodge represents not just a change of address, but a reckoning with who they are without the trappings of royal privilege. It forces them to confront the reality that their relevance was always borrowed, always dependent on their connection to an institution that has now decisively rejected them. The happiest divorced couple in the world narrative was only sustainable as long as they had Royal Lodge as their stage and the remnants of royal status as their costume. Without those props, they are simply two people in their 60s with complicated pasts and uncertain futures. The broader implications for the monarchy are significant as well. King Charles's handling of the Andrew situation will be closely watched as an indication of his leadership style and his willingness to make difficult family decisions in service of the institution.
Hug and public displays of affection are not something that I do.
By forcing Andrew and Sarah out of Royal Lodge and refusing their demands for separate properties, he sends a clear message that the days of unearned privilege and unaccountability are over. It's a necessary modernization, but one that comes at the cost of a very public family rupture. As the boxes are packed and the movers are scheduled, one thing is clear: an era is ending at Royal Lodge. What emerges from the rubble of this failed arrangement, and whether Sarah and Andrew can salvage anything resembling dignity or purpose from the wreckage, will determine their final legacy within the story of the British royal family. The fairy tale of the happiest divorced couple has reached its final chapter, and the ending is far from happy. The drama surrounding Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew's relationship shows no signs of abating. As their complicated history continues to unfold, many are left wondering, will their bond ultimately prevail? Or is this the beginning of the end? Share your predictions and thoughts in the comments below. And don't miss out on future updates on this royal couple's tumultuous journey. Hit subscribe to stay in the loop.